Good evening and welcome to Module 2 of Physical Science 1000. I hope that you're settling into the course now, that you've gotten some familiarity with the web page and how to navigate your way around it, how to submit articles or how to submit your responses to various articles, and how to log on and take the quizzes that are required every week. Wanted to remind you of some deadlines for those people who were assigned to post an article for the first module. Your deadline for doing so is midnight on Monday. That would be this evening. And for those people assigned to do postings for week 2, your deadline is midnight on Wednesday of this week. Everybody else is required to post at least 2 responses to each week's postings. You will have until noon on Saturday to post responses to 2 articles from week 1 as well as 2 articles from week 2. I would also encourage you to, as I say, check in every day to the website and at least look at the announcements to see whether or not there's anything going on that you need to be aware of in terms of deadlines or issues that have arisen in the course, so that you stay ahead of the curve for anything that may be happening. The quiz average on the first exam, or first quiz rather, was pretty good. It was about 20 out of 30. I hope we'll be able to get up to around 20 or 24. That's what I'm shooting for by the end of the course. That brings us to Module 2. In Chapter 3, we're going to be looking at the basic needs of living things. As we saw in Chapter 1, the world is dependent upon ecosystems to supply the necessary nutrients and environmental capital necessary to sustain living things. But what is it exactly that ecosystems provide to sustain living things? That's what we're going to look at in this chapter, beginning with what we call hierarchy of ecology. That is, how living things build on each other to a point where they become very interdependent. In the little slide you see here accompanying my narrative, we see, beginning with a simple cell, we build a more complex set of cells that together combine to form an organ, which then becomes part of an organism. This organism, though, depends upon its fellow creatures to build a community that interacts with its ecosystem and its environment. This environment is part of a larger, what we call biome, that is an area of the world that all fills into the world ecosystem. So we're going to look at how different living creatures and organisms depend upon each other in order to survive. Then we're going to look at what are the necessary conditions for survival. We'll see that for different species, different living organisms, there are going to be certain optimum factors, things like temperature, moisture, and other soil, all of which contribute to either the healthy growth of an organism or stifle the growth of an organism. We're going to see how these various environmental factors play on each other and with the organisms in an environmental system, so that you have either an optimal opportunity for survival and growth, or whether or not you have limits of tolerance that stress and inhibit the growth of organisms within an ecosystem. We're going to see how living things draw from what we call the various spheres of the environment for the nutrients that they need. The 3 main spheres being the atmosphere, or the air, where we draw gases necessary for life, such as oxygen for oxygen breathers. Water, which we draw from the hydrosphere, which is also necessary for life as we know it. And finally, minerals and other inorganic components that we draw from something called the lithosphere, or the earth. All these 3 spheres then interact to form the biosphere, which helps support life and ecology of all living things on the earth. We're going to look at the issue of matter and energy, because these basically encompass all the principles of life that we know of on Earth. Matter is simply the substance that makes up all things. We're going to look at how do we define matter, what makes matter, where does matter come from, and how does that interact with energy? How is energy necessary for the survival of living things? And what role does it play in making sure that life can be sustained? And more importantly, how does it provide the necessary energy to initiate the growth of plants through photosynthesis that eventually become the food for all of the other organisms up through the chain of life that we saw at the beginning of the chapter. And then finally, we're going to look at the cycling of matter, because one of the most important roles that ecosystems play is to recycle matter so that it can be reused over and over again in a sustainable manner. What is it that ecosystems do that allow them to replenish the necessary nutrients and materials necessary for the survival of all living things? And unfortunately, what impacts are human society having on these various recycling mechanisms within ecosystems? Because if we're to help these ecosystems survive, if we're to help assure the continued recycling of nutrients so that there will always be the resources necessary to support life of humanity and other living things, we have to both understand how cycling of matter occurs, how it is that humans might be impacting these cycles in mostly a negative way, and how can we stop these negative impacts and reverse them and assure that through good stewardship that these resources are available for future generations. So I welcome you to Chapter 3, Module 2. I encourage you to get started on the readings and to, again, participate in the discussions. Look at the postings from your fellow students. We had several very good postings from week 1. If you haven't already read them, please do so and make comments. And I look forward to the new comments, the new postings that we're going to get from students assigned to Module 2. Good evening.